know why you're doing what you're doing. Know why you want to farm, because it's a grind, man. And day to day, week to week, month to month, season to season, it's up and down. There's highs and lows. It's the best thing ever some days, and some days you want to quit. And if you don't have a good why, you can't bear the many hows in which you can do it. And so understand why it is you're doing what you're doing, why you want to start a farm, and carry that with you every day, because that's the thing that keeps you going when the things are bad, and that's the thing that makes you feel great and on top of the world when things are good.
Hello, Ryan.
Hey, Chris.
So today we're going to talk about the many challenges of starting a farm.
Cool.
In our other video together, we were speaking about how to start a farm, and you gave a lot of advice and your experience on that. But we're going to kind of focus in on the challenges today. I kind of have a list of how we're going to break it down.
Okay.
So we're going to start from, I think, probably the biggest piece of the puzzle for a lot of people, or the thing that's most front and central on their mind when they're starting to farm, which would just be money. But more specifically than that, let's call it capital.
Yes.
Because I believe you have quite a bit to say about the types of capital that go beyond money. So let's start there. What are the challenges that people are going to face when it comes to money and capital and starting a farm?
Yeah, sure, man. Money's always a challenge, I think. I think the biggest thing you want to think about is how you're using it effectively. For us, we built a lot of our farm with the circular economy. So a lot of fence boards, a lot of old fences that we turned into pump houses, tool walls, garden sheds, and used the resources that we had, because, we weren't swimming in money. And so I think the important thing is to think about, look at what you have, assess what's available to you, look at other sources of money or capital, like, what do you have personally that you're willing to put in? And I would also say, like, mitigate the risk. Like, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't put all your money into your farm project. We slow rolled ours. I think I said it in the other video we were talking about. We built our farm over like a year and a half, 2 years. We're still building it. Like, there's things that we want to have on our farm that we don't have because we haven't had the financial capital to do it. A greenhouse, for example, for winter production. And so you have to manage that pretty smartly, I would say holistically. And money's not necessarily the only form of capital either that you want to be leveraging. I mean, you can look at, there's a great book and I guess concept called the 8 forms of capital that come from a great book called Regenerative Enterprise. And that's where I borrow that from. And that's how I would quantify my capital before starting a farm or even while running a farm is, you can do a lot without money. If you have a good resource base of friends, family, you have material capital on your farm. So when we moved into our place, we really looked at like what's available on the site already. Like, there was old buildings that we can retrofit. There's buildings we can take down and rebuild and use the lumber, and if you're doing those things, you're not spending the money on those things. We easily could have built new garden sheds for ourselves, but there was some old buildings on the property that had some good wood. So we had time. Time was a resource we had. So we take down the buildings, save the good wood, cut it up, turn it into a garden shed, a pump house. I have friends who tear down old fences. They drop them off at our place. We tear the fences apart and we use the fence boards as wall panels. We use the 4x4s as posts for a new garden shed or whatever it is we're building.
Free. They were
free. It's free, right?
Yeah, that's great.
We connect with like a local arborist who drops off wood chips for free because he has to pay to dump it.
My farm did the same thing.
Yeah, and so it's about like, how do you leverage these different forms of capital, whether it's like social capital, like through your network and connections of people? How can you leverage that? Because there's always people willing to come out and give a hand. There's always people who, you know, I'm lucky we have a lot of friends in the skilled trades. So like if I need an electrician or a mason, and when you're on building a farm, you need all of those things.
Or you need to be all those things.
Right. And sometimes all it takes is, you know, like you throw a pizza party or a case of beer and someone to come over and do a job for you. Right. And so it's about like looking at your resource base as a whole. Financial capital is part of it, but I think a big part of it is like what's existing on the property already. Like what living capital do you have? Like soil, trees. You know, we've gotten so much free firewood for the house because we have a forest. You know, we can leverage the forest as a source for inputs for the farm. Things like that, you know, and, you know, can you trade, you know, I follow Richard Perkins, and his famous thing is, you know, he traded a bunch of chickens to build like an egg packery with an old caravan, right? So you don't have to buy new. It's about how do you like use the resources available to you, and how do you build that capital, and how do you like even turn some of your financial capital into other forms of capital that you can then leverage to put it together.
I want to add to that, but let me close this door
Yeah.
because the walk-in cooler or some sort of fan just went on. So that I love all that, but if we're to talk just about financial capital,
Yeah.
what do you say to people, or what advice do you have for thinking about borrowing money? You know, whether or not you should or should not go for loans, borrowing money from family, or you know,
Sure,
these things.
Sure, it's always a tricky one. I mean, I think I would avoid borrowing if you can. I think borrowing money is a good tool for a certain application. I think whenever you're going to borrow money, I think you need to be sure of whatever you're borrowing the money for, you know how that money is going to pay itself back. So like if I was going to borrow money for a greenhouse, I know that greenhouse is going to pay me back. What you don't want to do is borrow money and not have a plan for it, and borrow a bunch of money just to build your farm. I think you need to know how that money is going to get paid back over time, and you need to invest it in things that are going to generate revenue. Don't invest it in things that aren't going to be revenue generating. And so looking at your farm, know how it's going to make money. I would say too, the best thing about the financial aspect is, some of the best advice I ever got was cash flow your farm with customers. So if you don't have the capital, you can easily get customers. Start small. Produce something that doesn't cost a lot to produce. Like microgreens is a perfect example. For $1,000, you can set up a rack with lights and trays and seed, and that can produce $500 worth of revenue a week. It's going to return on its investment very quickly. It's also going to allow you to start small with little risk, and it's going to generate revenue, and it's going to teach you how to go out and actually like make sales and find customers. Like, to throw a bunch of money at things that you've borrowed and have an interest rate to pay back, that's a lot of risk, at least for me personally. That's a lot of risk when you don't know yet if it's working, or if it's going to work, or if the whole thing's going to work, right? And so I would say break it out into chunks. Look at what you have financial capital wise. Build what's essential. Spend the money on what's essential first. Like for us, we put our cash into like a couple shipping containers because we needed a wash pack station, like full stop. We needed a 6-row seeder, right? These are the things that were going to pay us back instantly, you know, but we didn't buy a greenhouse right away because, you know, we just didn't have enough resources to do that. We didn't buy a tractor because it wasn't a game changer, right? Spend your money on game changing things, and then spend it slowly. And if you can cash flow your farm with customers, you're doing much better than having to borrow money. And then once you get to a point where you're like, it's working, you have customers, you know there's revenue there, and you could borrow money to scale up, I think that's a better strategy for me. Yeah. You know, we put money away from our full-time jobs, and that was our loan. We loaned it to ourselves, essentially. We put it into the business month by month until we had enough to buy the things we needed, and then started buying them slowly. And then we didn't buy more things until we had the funds available to do it. It just mitigates a lot of risk and stress and pressure. But if you're risk tolerant and pressure tolerant, then by all means, it's a good tool. for sure. And I mean, you can always borrow from family and friends possibly, but that's also risky business as well, because you don't want to affect those relationships too much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Make Christmas uncomfortable.
What about the challenge that someone might have of selling? Like what I'm hearing is if you're prepared with your sales outlets, then, you know, that mitigates a lot of risk in terms of borrowing money. So then that now makes me think of the other challenge of finding sales outlets. And for a lot of farmers, that maybe not, I don't know how many, but that's probably a challenge for them, is just selling enough of what they have. Maybe they have a lot of stuff they can't sell. Where do you start there?
Man, I think sales is half the game. I think sales is probably the biggest challenge. I don't know if every farmer would say this, but I would say it, like growing the vegetables is the easy part.
I do recall on my farm in the past, the vegetable grower and the manager of it would always talk about how much he didn't like being a glorified drug hustler. Is how he felt, that he was constantly needing to hustle. We were just interrupted for a moment, but back to what I was saying is, the vegetable manager of my farm in the past would just consistently be frustrated with having to hustle to sell. And he just wanted to farm and focus on that. And I think if you're starting to farm, for many growers, it's the growing that they're probably more interested in, and so selling might be a huge.
It's a challenge for a number of reasons. Like at the end of the day, it's the customers and that community connection and the sales that make your operation viable. Unless you're growing for like not for profit for whatever reason, but like that's what keeps your business alive. And so I think one fallacy that a lot of people go into farming with is not being prepared to actually like run it like a business. And I think, you know, sales is half of the game, and you need to kind of have some idea on how to set that up to begin with. Like you do need to understand a bit of market research and where your sales are going to come from, and establish those quickly. And listen, it takes time. It's competitive out there. There's other farmers that are selling to people you might already want to sell to, and being new, it's not easy to get customers. This is why I would always say, like, start small with what you can manage first and that you have demand for. Because I often see a lot of times people have this idea in their mind, and it's from like watching people like JM who have been successful, and other farmers who have kind of that paradigm of like, I can do 150,000 on an acre and a half. People see that as a carrot and think they can do it, and they can. But they get ahead of themselves in the production, and then they don't have a sales for it. And then you have a lot of wasted time, energy, and resources in producing those things and then not being able to sell them. And so I would say, like, you need to grow sustainably. Like, start small, learn what you can sell first and produce that.
It makes me think of something that I think even a home gardener can realize, which is that only grow what you're going to eat. I think a lot of people, the first time they start a garden, they grow a whole bunch of stuff they don't necessarily love that much, or they don't want to eat it as often. There's too much of it. But if you just think about the things that you like to eat all the time and you never grow tired of, that should be
I think we've all grown too many tomatoes at one point in our life.
And you tell yourself, oh, I'll can them all. And then you don't find the time. But what you're saying to me, like, it's a perfect link there, that it's the same with selling. Like, don't grow a bunch of things you can't sell.
And you know what, like, your sales avenues aren't always going to be what you'd hope they'd be. You know, like, we've gone to a couple markets in the last few seasons, and you know, at the start of the season I'm thinking, this is the revenue I'm going to be able to generate from that market, and then sometimes the market's just not there. And so you have to be, I would say, also diversify how you do your sales. You know, so for us, like, we go to a couple of farmers markets, but then we also sell wholesale to like a food aggregator who picks up at our farm. We haven't traditionally run a CSA, but we have people who pre-order on our website, build their own bag, and then come pick up. So if you have those different revenue streams, then we obviously sell to like some chefs and restaurants as well. But like, some of those people will drop off. Some of them will be hit and miss. Some of them will be steady. And so you kind of have to figure out that your distribution channels and where you can sell, and then figuring out how to make that efficient. Like, for me, last year, the biggest lesson we learned was too much time and energy going to the market, just in terms of like distribution and driving and setup,
of course,
for the return, right? And so now we're thinking, how can we run like a membership CSA model instead, where we invite people to the farm and then there's less opportunity cost of going to the market and not being on the farm. We can actually produce more and probably sell more and create a better experience by bringing people out. And then our sales are going to go up, but then also like our productivity is going to go up, and then also like our quality of life is going to go up. So I think you got to look at it really holistically in terms of like what you're capable of doing, what you can sell, what works best for your context. Like for me, I'm farming by myself often the last couple of years with some part-time help. But so like me going to the market means there's nobody at the farm for half a day, right? So there's an opportunity cost there. It's about balancing all those things to find like that flow and that's the difference between profitable and not profitable.
Speaking more about finding your sales avenues, that makes me think of the social challenges of farming. In particular, what I mean is the challenges of like, if you want to find many people to buy your produce, you kind of need to get out there and be social, be known in your community. And I think for a lot of farmers, particularly, the introverted ones, or the ones that really just want to be alone at the farm, that's what they're seeking. That piece can be really hard. What advice do you have on that?
I mean, you do have to be a salesperson to a degree to sell your own product. I mean, you can hire somebody out to do that, but then there's a cost to that. So I think, you're going to learn as you go, and you're going to figure it out, and nobody's as passionate as you are ever going to be about your own product. But that's where like a good partner comes in, is if you're that introvert and you really are like scared to death to sell into people and being the face, then you have someone who maybe has that skill. That's a good person to look for in terms of partnership. And, talking about these different forms of capital, like building that network before you start your farm or while you're starting your farm, I think is super important. Like it goes such a long way to not just thinking about like that financial capital, but having that resource base where you can have collaborative partnerships with local businesses to help you sell. Like for us, when we started, we had produce halfway through the season. So we weren't in any markets yet because we were building our farm, and then we grew some to sell. And I was lucky enough that I had some good relationships with some local business people. They gave us some spots to pop up. So we popped up in front of like a furniture store, who's a friend of mine. They own a furniture store, but it gave us a little market to pop up once a week.
Interesting place to pop up.
Very interesting, but they had a great location. Like they were downtown.
And it worked?
Yeah, it worked. It helped us get those initial customers, because you can go on social media and try to get people to come to you. And like that was our hope. It doesn't always work. And so you have to be creative, and we leveraged our network very well. Like I was good friends with a couple of guys who own a brewery in town as well. And so they gave us a spot to pop up in front of their brewery. So they already have a lot of traffic. They're friends of mine. They're like, you can pop up for free, use our property. And that relationship that setting up there cost me nothing, but I could leverage that social capital that I created by having a good relationship with those guys. And then since then, we've actually built out like a full-on farmer's market at their brewery the last couple of years. And so now there's a crowd of people that come to their brewery on the weekend. It benefits them. We have a market that we control, that we work with other vendors.
Get your groceries and a beer at the same time.
Yeah, 100%,
Win-win.
right? Then we do live music, and we have people on the patio, and it's a really cool like cultural scene we've created. And so we've built this kind of cultural capital now in the community that didn't exist before. And so people come out to the brewery, and they get extra customers. We get a place to sell that we don't really have in the marketplace. And it's kind of this everyone wins relationship, right? So you don't always have to pay for things to make it work. It's how do you leverage the resources that you have and those social networks that you have?
There's a few things I want to touch on. I like you mentioning cultural capital there at the end. Where I live here, it's the same place the Jam lives.
Yeah.
We have a really amazing community that just kind of comes around small scale farming and just all the different small businesses that are around here. And I think if you're involved in that, you have a presence in the community and you want to start a farm, you're kind of ahead because like you have this cultural capital around you, and people are going to pay attention. And I think if you don't have that, it's wise to start.
You have to cultivate it. Yeah, start to cultivate it.
And then another thing you said earlier that I took note of was that you said specifically to have things prepared before.
Yes.
I forget exactly which thing you were talking about, but it was basically just saying you want to have things figured out before you start the farm, or at the very least in the very beginning, and ideally not after or well after. And I think it links back to something you said in our other video, which was slow down.
Yeah.
And I think this is a huge challenge that probably a lot of farmers out there do face, is that maybe they bite off a bit more than they can chew. They go a bit too fast, and you kind of run into the burnout.
Yes.
So what can you say about that?
That's a great question. And I think it's something that we've all experienced in agriculture or in farming. For me, the last 2 years have been very tough, very challenging, because, we started our farm during COVID, and as we were just getting it going, I kind of lost my job for whatever reason, and then had to depend on the farm as kind of like a main source of income. And that was never like our plan. The plan was to have it as kind of this like side project for a couple of years, prove that we can make it work to make a living for 1 or 2 people. And so we just hired people with very little risk. Like, we set it all up. We just hired someone to run it, and it was making enough to pay them and then pay the farm back a little bit, but like it wasn't fully running yet, right? And that's because we were starting small and slow, so it wasn't at a scale where it was ready to make a living for somebody full time. And then I was kind of forced to make it work. And then luckily for me, like, I had enough experience that I knew what to do, but I didn't have the financial capital right then and there at that time to like scale it up really quick. So we had to be really creative in terms of like how to leverage the resources we have available to make that work in this kind of new changing. Our context got completely flipped on its head, right?
Yeah.
And so you look to your resource base and like, what can I leverage to help me make this work? And so you go to your, people who you can work with and collaborate with. We had lots of family and friends that come out and help as well. But it's also like, to your point, like, you do need to slow down, because going too hard, too fast, and trying to do too much, you spread yourself very thin. And then what you end up with is a bunch of cups half full, instead of having one full cup that you're just focusing on, right? And if you're trying to do too many things at once, like, you got 8 plots when you can really only manage 4, and you can't afford to hire labor to manage those other 4, like, you need to shrink it down, do what's manageable for your knowledge, skills, and ability, and master that first. Because if you don't have that mastered, then you're trying to do 8 things half well. And that's not a good formula for success. Do one thing very well, and then go from there.
It makes me think of what you were talking about earlier too, the idea of context and your why, which is like, do you really need, I think a lot of people when they start their farm, they just want to grow everything.
Yes.
And they want to sell to everyone.
Yes.
And then you're talking about how you started a farm and it was only on the part-time. And it makes me think too, like, how many people out there are just having a side business farm versus it's their full business? And is that actually, a lot of people that want to start a farm, like, maybe that's actually where they should start, is just a side business. And what do you have to say there? Like, how should people think about this? Do you think they're, like, to someone that you think maybe is getting well ahead of themselves,
Like, again, so slow down, and then really understand your why. And like, for us, it was very much about building a homestead. Like, we wanted it to be productive enough that it could obviously pay back the investment we put into infrastructure and tools and into the landscape. And so we were setting it up to, like, revenue and sales and economics wasn't the number one thing. Like, we weren't necessarily doing it to like get rich or make a bunch of money. For us, it was very much about quality of life and lifestyle. Like, I love it. We wanted to be on the property and like working with nature and building something that that's noble, and we can sell to the community and invite the community in. And like, half the reason I farm is I just like to get together with people and have a nice meal, and like having a space to bring family and friends to is like top of our list, right? And so, understanding your context, and then and slowing down and making sure like you know why you're doing it and not spreading yourself thin is super important.
So like I imagine in your context, because you built it for those reasons, you probably designed it in such a way that, you know, if it doesn't go so well at certain times, it's not like you're just completely sunk in life. Because you wanted a homestead. A lot of it's about the lifestyle. It's not just about make or break the money.
Correct. And like we haven't scaled up for that reason, right? It's like the last 2 seasons have really been about just making it work and understanding the nuance there and establishing our market and having like a consistent level of sales that we know we can depend on, dialing the production in and making sure we can max value at like these 6 plots that we have before adding like 2 more plots, before building a greenhouse, or before you know, adding more. Like we added chickens last year, and to me that's a new thing for me. So that's a new thing we had to learn, and we didn't know how that was going to work, but it's helped, you know, save us money on fertilizer. We get free eggs. It saves us money on eggs. And so we look at it like as that big picture. Like, yeah, we have chickens. We're not getting rich on the eggs, but we get free eggs and we save money on buying eggs, and we sell enough eggs that it pays to feed the chickens, and we get compost.
And you probably enjoy
from the chickens.
For them,
yeah, and we like the chickens them. And we get a resource to put on the garden. And, you know, so it's about looking at it holistically and not doing more than we can't like realistically do. And when you do that, like it's about being regenerative and being resilient. And if you're spread too thin, you don't have any resilience. Like one thing falls apart, the whole system breaks, right?
Yeah.
In our context, we're trying to build that resource base where if one thing fails or one market doesn't work out or this doesn't work, we have different ways to like bounce back and it doesn't sink us, right? And then keeping that energy so you don't get burnt out is important. And you got to consciously think about that, because it's easy to work 70 hours a week and with 1 million pots on the go. Focus on like the 2 or 3 levers that work and double down on that.
Let's move on to talking about skills.
Yeah.
Because obviously a big part of starting a farm is just having all the skills you're going to need, not only the farming and the growing skills, but the business skills, the marketing skills, you know, and if you don't have a big social network of people that are going to be helping you, it might also be building skills, plumbing skills, electric, like a lot of farmers wear many hats.
Yes.
So where to begin thinking about, you know, your skill set? What do you have at your disposal? What should you be thinking about before you take the leap to starting a farm?
Well, I would certainly audit myself first, and I think that's something everyone should do if they're going to go be ambitious enough to start a farm. Like seriously look at yourself and be honest with yourself and say, what am I good at? What do I suck at? And then look at what you're trying to accomplish. What skills do I need to make this farm work? And then see where the gap is. And then wherever there's a gap, go acquire those skills. Like take an online course, take the master class at the Institute, go work on a farm where you're going to get those skills, you know, or find a way to teach yourself. You know, like we needed to dig our own pond. I didn't have that skill. So, you know, we watched a bunch of YouTube videos on like how to have bigger machines and like
YouTube University.
This is it, right? I mean, you can, with the age of the internet, you can teach yourself pretty much anything now. You can go get a book. You don't need to necessarily go to school for 2 years or 4 years to get a degree and learn a bunch of things. You can teach yourself or go learn from others. But I think you really got to audit yourself and ask yourself, what am I good at? What do I want to do? What do I like doing? And then wherever there is gaps, either bring somebody else on to work with you, either hire them or bring them on as a partner, or go get that experiential capital that you need to kind of fill that cup up. You know, like for us, I'm not very handy. My skill set is like planning, design, putting the pieces together, and then like market gardening, because that's what I have experience in. And I'm lucky enough that the guys that I work with, the property owners, like they can build anything. And so when we need something built, I just stand back and be the laborer and let somebody else like build those things. And then you learn as you go. And then now, you know, after like 3 or 4 years of farming, you learn those skills just by default, because at the end of the day, when something's broken, you have to fix it, or you have to build something yourself, and you don't want to pay somebody else to do it. It's much cheaper to figure it out by yourself and fail a bunch.
This seems like another place where before versus after is pretty important. Like, yes, you can learn on the fly, and sometimes it's going to work, and that can be energizing and fun. But I think a lot of people, again, hit a wall at some point when, you know, you just don't have the time. Like, I'm a big dedicated student of YouTube University.
Yes.
I love to learn things via what I can find on YouTube, but it does take time. And I have to sift through, and I have to find the right information. I'm really into that. I get kind of obsessed with things I want to learn, so I tend to manage. But there's plenty of ways in which it's not really like the most efficient way for me to learn certain things. And also moments where I can recognize, like, this is just simply going to take too much time to figure this thing out. I'm going to get help from someone else now, but I would still like to learn in the future. How should someone be thinking about that when they're starting a farm?
I think too, there's something to be said about just getting started. Like, you can, a lot of people, I think, sometimes will also use that as an excuse to not get started. They need to know, I'm someone like that. Like, I need to know something in depth before I go do it. I need to go learn, read 10 books, or like take a course.
By analysis can,
and then exactly. Then you spend a year reading about the thing you could have just probably learned by doing it and failing a bunch first. And so like, I would say, if it's not going to cost you a lot, just do it and fail fast and learn, because the best way to learn is to fail, is to do it and fail, right? Like, I wouldn't start failing on, like, you know, a big project like digging a pond. I would start small and
dig a hole.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, if you're not sure and you don't have the skills and you're learning as you're going, don't bite off more than you can chew, because you're gonna fail. Like, it's gonna happen. Like, I had 7 years of market garden experience before I started my market garden, and I still fail every week. But this is the beautiful thing about farming and having your own farm, is it's iteration after iteration after iteration. And if you have a thing where you just you have constant innovation, constant learning, where you're observing what's happened, why you failed, iterate, get better, and go from there. Like, half of it is just getting started. And making your failures not expensive.
So really and I know this, like, I'm not trying to be too negative about don't start your farm until you're ready, but there's a sweet spot, you could say, or a balance between just starting and being prepared. Like, I can just think back in my own experience that I think I was the type of person that was going too far ahead before preparation, but then there might be other people that are too far into preparation and not just starting. Because I remember seeing some video online when I was pretty young about a person just talking about how they got 10 chickens and they failed, but then that was the moment their life started, because then they got 500 and started a business and they learned from it, and it motivated me to fail. But I think I went too far in that direction. It was like, oh, failing's great, I just want to keep failing. Because every time you fail, you learn and grow. And that's true to an extent. But I think, you have to think about the balance between those two things. You need to learn,
so you need to learn to enjoy losing to a degree, because that's the impetus to, like, help you evolve and get better. And, like, it's funny you mentioned the chickens. Like, we'd like to have 99 chickens, because that's, like, the number we can have, but it's also, like, that's gonna max us out in terms of, like, economic viability of eggs. We've only had 25 because, like, that's all I could fathom managing at the start, right? We started small, knowing we want to have 100, but I wasn't about to get 100 chickens when I've never raised chickens. So, like, start with 5, man, because if they all die, it's going to suck. 5 dying is better than 100 dying.
This brings back personal experiences as well. I wasn't usually in charge of these chickens, but I have seen in different operations chickens come and go real fast. And usually it's at the mercy of the wild predators.
Correct.
And people that were trying to give it a go without proper fencing,
Yeah.
just thinking, it'll be fine.
Yes. Well, and like failing big is discouraging. Failing
Yeah.
small is okay. And like you want to test. Do tests. Small tests, see what works. Try, fail, learn again. And like if there's something that you don't know and you really want to learn how to do it, like go work for free for somebody and learn how to do it. Like if I wanted to like learn carpentry or learn masonry, like I'd go work with my friend for a couple of weeks and for free. And they'll be happy to take the free labor and you get a free education out of it. You know, we have people who come out to our place who want to learn how to farm. I can't afford to pay them because like they don't have any skills, right?
Yeah.
And so they'll come out and just shadow me for a day or two and work here or there. And it's a nice exchange of value because they're learning something. And like, I'm happy to sit down and talk to them and walk them through everything, especially if they're helping me get a job done. You know, there's a value exchange there. They're interested in this thing. They're learning how to do it. They're coming to work for free. They get an experience. So they're building their experiential capital. I get like some free labor, but I also just get extra help, and it's a nice value exchange there. So one thing we've done on our farm that I haven't talked about yet is, you know, we haven't really had employees the last 2 years. I've had some part-time help, and there has been a couple of people that we've paid for part-time help, but we're really trying to create an environment where we have kind of these collaborative partnerships. So like I hired a guy who wanted to start his own apiary. And so he had no places to put his bees. So we gave him a spot on the farm. Like we wanted bees on the farm, but I didn't necessarily want to spend a bunch of money to set it all up because I also didn't have time to take care of it and I don't have any knowledge of how to do that. So he comes in, I pay him to work on the farm so many hours, but we just give him a salary and he stays a little bit longer, comes in a little bit earlier, does a little bit more. In exchange, he's got a free place to do his bees. He gets to start a business. So he's like an entrepreneur and he's helping us work on the farm, but then he's also teaching me how to operate the bees as well. And then I've since then invested in a couple of hives, small, one at a time, and we're growing that out and I'm learning from him. He gets a free space. And so building that, like, again, that social capital. I don't have that experiential capital with the bees and the honey, but I'm investing in that in a different way. It's not like I'm paying somebody to just come and set it up. I'm giving them the space because we have a resource that this person doesn't have available to them, land and space.
Yeah.
And so then they can come and use our land and our resources to manage their hive, and in exchange they do some extra work for us and everybody wins. We did the same thing last year with the lady who worked with us who wanted to start like a flower operation. Same thing, we built her some beds, she worked on the farm, she does a little bit extra in exchange for a free plot of beds to grow her own flowers, and then she can start a flower operation off of it, and then suddenly now we have flowers and bees and vegetables and all these extra resources that we can now leverage. And if I wanted some bouquets to sell on my stand, I could do that. If I have my own supply of honey for the year that I don't pay for. And so you're building all these different forms of capital without really, like, money was never exchanged in most of those transactions.
Yeah. How do you see the balance between, you know, utilizing, just for simplest terms, like volunteer help versus, you know, paying people and having employees? Because I ask this because I think a lot of farms potentially get a little bit stuck, like in the volunteer zone. Maybe, you know, it might be really nice at the very beginning. You have a few events, parties, or people, you know, and it's beautiful. It's community building, but you know, you can't just necessarily have volunteers run a farm. You know,
you cannot.
And for years, and then that often leads to social problems between people. So how do you kind of see that, or what kind of advice do you give to people that are, you know, they're thinking about that? So
I think you're absolutely right. You can't you're going to struggle to run your economic operation on volunteers. I think it's good in a community setting that can work. But if you're trying to run any kind of business, you can't rely on volunteers because they're unreliable. But volunteers are great because there's a different transaction there. And I think you want to make sure that there's not a gray area where they think that they're invested in the business or the farm or they get profits or something.
Yeah.
It's about clear communication and setting the expectations, I think, at the start. And so we're very clear about what the arrangement is. You know, with anyone who comes to work with us, it's like, these are the jobs I'm paying you to do. This is the salary I'm paying you. You need to get these jobs done. Like, I'd prefer not to pay an hourly rate. I'd prefer to be like, this is the salary I'm willing to pay you a week. These are the jobs that need to get done. This is how long it should take. I know because I've done it. And then that's a motivating factor for those people to
be more efficient.
Well, be more efficient, and right. And it's not like I'm like, you can't leave till the job's done. It's more like, here's a goal to achieve. This is how you can do it, and you give them the tools to be able to do that. And then, you know, it's about creating an environment where it's like, you do have to treat an employee different than you do a volunteer. You know, we have volunteers that come out, and I give them a little more autonomy to decide on how they want their experience to be, right? I'll never like send them to just do a job like I would an employee. It's more like, what are you interested in? What are your goals? What would you like to get out of this experience? And I would still do that with an employee. But you just have to be very clear. Set the boundaries, set the expectations, have clear communication. And if there ever is like a gray area or a breakdown, then you need to have that conversation, I think, right then and there. And to make sure that it's just clarity. And like, you can go so far as to like have a contract and have something written out where it's like, here's the situation if you're a volunteer, here's the expectations, here's what's not expected. If you're an employee, here's the expectations. If you're someone coming in and being like an entrepreneur where you're sharing the land, well then here's the expectations involved with that. And I think it's just setting those boundaries, being clear.
Yeah, it makes me think like you can't expect a volunteer to function like an employee.
No, and I think that's a mistake some people make.
Like an employee, you can be a bit more like you know, like, I need this done, and like I expect you to try hard.
There's more accountability.
To work. Like if it's tough, I kind of expect you a bit to like try and try to work through that. That's kind of what this is. We're doing physical labor.
Yes.
But if it's a volunteer, you know,
correct,
you shouldn't have that same expectation, I think.
And
or if you do, you're probably just not gonna get what you want.
No, and you have to be very careful too when you're bringing on employees and volunteers. As we've talked about, there's a whole social dynamic there, right? Like, people have feelings, people have egos, and so you have to be the type of person that's willing to manage that. And oftentimes, like, volunteers, even employees, can be more work than they're good for sometimes, and so it takes away sometimes from the work that could be getting done because you're managing relationships. So you have to factor that in, and you have to know that, is that something you're willing and capable of doing before you take that on? And I think you want to set up some systems in place to be able to do that and structure it in a way that it just makes it easier on you. And then, you know, the difference between volunteers and employees sometimes too is I try not to put any volunteers in like key points of the operation. Like, I typically wouldn't have a volunteer like washing and packing or seeding a bed or transplanting a crop. Like, even an employee, I typically have the real add value jobs I try to do myself. We're small, like it's me and a couple of employees, but at a bigger scale, you can't really do everything yourself.
Yeah.
But it's also identifying like what people are capable of doing, what their skill set is, giving them a role they're gonna flourish in, because there's nothing worse than giving somebody a job to do and then, you know, you're paying them to do that and it's not being done well or something like that. So training's important, educating them is important, being there to support them is important, giving them the right tools, and making sure you can manage it before you think about doing it.
I'm gonna check the camera because we're losing light, people. I just want to make sure we're not sitting in the dark. Oh, we're getting there. Okay, we're back. I took off my filter. Hopefully you can see us not sitting in the dark because the sun is going down. Ryan, I think that's going to wrap it up.
Nice.
Obviously, we could keep talking about this forever. Starting a farm can be amazing, but it can also be so difficult. And I think there's so many different contexts of starting farms. And so I really have liked hearing what you have to say about that. Do you have any kind of, if you could, let's say this, if you could give just like a kind of final piece of like really big picture advice to someone that's just interested in having a farm of their own of any kind?
I'll take it back to, I think what we started with is understand your why. Know why you're doing what you're doing. Know why you want to farm, because it's a grind, man. And day to day, week to week, month to month, season to season, it's up and down. There's highs and lows. It's the best thing ever some days, and some days you want to quit. And if you don't have a good why, you can't bear the many hows in which you can do it. And so understand why it is you're doing what you're doing, why you want to start a farm, and carry that with you every day, because that's the thing that keeps you going when the things are bad. And that's the thing that makes you feel great and on top of the world when things are good.
Great last words, I think, for this
Thank you.
conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you on the next one.